shining.
What was that, Jeff? You looking at my night shot there?
Your night shot, but I'm seeing the sun shining into the office there at the office building.
Ah. Was that Jeff? You looking at my night shot there?
The night shot, but I'm seeing the sun shining into the office there at the office building.
Ah.
Yeah, the people in our front lobby there.
Was that Jeff? You looking at my night shot there?
The night shot, but I'm seeing the sun shining into the office there at the office building.
Ah.
Yeah, the people in our, sorry. Fixed it.
Hey, Roger, I don't know what satellite that's bouncing off at the end of the solar system and coming back at, but that's quite a lag.
Yeah, that's just, when I start the stream, it automatically starts up a window with the stream in it. And I'm like, that's not helpful to have the meeting and the stream on the same computer. Does it automatically.
Well, should we go ahead and get started? It's 10 o'clock or 10:01 actually by my clock here. I'd like to welcome everybody. I see many of you here on the screens. Do we have a quorum, Krista?
We have a quorum, we do not have a majority vote. Oh, we now.
Now we do. Okay. And who's there at the office, Roger?
It's just staff here. So Krista, Jeff Starkey, and Jeff Irwin. And then a few of our staff they like to do the Zoom version. So we've got most of the other executive team in their own windows.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome to all. Great to have you here. Let's go on to the second item, approval of minutes of February 13, 2023. Anybody have any questions or comments? And if not, can we have a motion to approve them?
Just a quick question. This is Adam from Linden.
Yep.
So this was new to me. I haven't seen in the minutes. There was a link to the YouTube video for a lot of the discussion and commentary, which is really cool. But there's no written description. My understanding is the written minutes are actually the official minutes and not a video. And so just linking to the video on a discussion item may not suffice for state code. So that's something you might want to look at, Roger, and just make sure that we're.
We looked into it and saw that it was.
Yeah. Aaron.
Who's doing research on that?
That's how he was doing them. And I looked for the league's minutes.
So the league is doing it, Santa Quinn, a few cities are starting to do that.
It's a little more of a true.
So
It's not
I
as
guess-
biased.
yeah, we'll take it as an action item to confirm that, but we had seen it being done by other governmental entities. So rather than coming up with an interpretation of that written, we have an actual recording of the meeting was better and met the requirement, but it's a good point. We'll look into that just to confirm that.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Adam. That's a good question. I know we've been doing this for a few meetings at least. I can't remember how many months, but that is actually a good point to check out. So if we can get an affirmative opinion on that, Roger, that'd be great. Okay, with that for action for the future, do we have a motion to approve the minutes for this month? Or for this meeting, I should say, for the February minutes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the meetings for the February, the minutes for the February meeting.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a second.
I'll second that. This is Adam.
Okay, I heard Adam and somebody else. I'll take whichever either you heard there, Krista, and we can, all in favor of approving the minutes of February 13th, say aye.
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 Yes.
Also aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, we will consider the minutes adopted unanimously. Let's move on to item number 3. So this is interesting and very big step. And sorry, what's that? Oh, never mind. Step for us as an entity. I know many of you, if not all of you, have heard over the months in the last couple of years of our relationship with Golden State Connect Authority and the potentials that presages for Utah or UTOPIA and Utah, I guess for that matter. So in this resolution, we would be finalizing and executing a fiber communication service contract between our UTOPIA and Golden State Connect Authority. Roger, do you want to describe that and give us some background here?
Yeah, so let me give you a little history with Golden State Connect Authority. So they are a joint powers authority created in California. They have 40, if not, it's almost 40 members, and the members are counties in California. These counties are rural counties, so they represent, even though they're rural, they still represent about 5 million population across an area that's very large. So it's not any of the big cities or the coastal ones. It's actually all the ones away from the coast, basically. They want to do fiber projects. It's, the scope of the projects is where there's a lot of work to be done. However, they want to know that they can figure this stuff out, and as far as design and how to operate and all of this stuff. And so,
hey, Roger, let me interrupt you for a sec. Bob was having some difficulty hearing you. Is anybody else having difficulty? I did have to turn up my volume on you, but I can hear you just fine. Anybody else having problems?
move this mic closer to you, maybe that'll help.
I crank my volume and I can hear okay.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Roger.
Okay, so anyways, the entity people will be more familiar with over there would be RCRC, which is the rural county representatives of California. And they've done a lot of other projects, financing housing and utilities and things like that. And so this is an area that they wanted to grow in, and yet, they've said, well, how do we start up a utopia here in California? And they came to the realization that there weren't a lot of resources available, and that was a pretty big lift. There's not a lot of people doing open access fiber networks successfully. And so as we talked with them over time, they felt like the better structure would be for them to just contract with us to help them both in the feasibility work and also in structuring things like RFPs, doing scoring. But we're not the ones that own these networks. We're not on the hook financially or legally. Like, it would all be them as the entity doing this, but they would contract with us as an operating partner to help them through this. It's much like our relationship with Idaho Falls. They did their own financings. They, responsible as the legal entity of ownership and responsibility for the project. But we come in with supporting roles, and we obviously charge for that. It becomes a good revenue growth for us. In California, we don't have a specific scope of projects. So you say, okay, what are we doing? We've got this operating agreement where we come in and operate, build and operate these networks. This is basically approving a form with them and how we would partner with them and how we would charge. We have a 3% that we charge them on the overhead of design and consulting on that sort of stuff. But then the real revenue for us is in the operating. If we get customers on the system, we get our share of the revenue. We use our NOC, we use our sales teams, our marketing, others to kind of fill certain roles for them and charge them for that. And so they've really wanted to have this structure in place so that as they go out and get financing or apply for grants, they can show there's a capability. Today they don't have staffing and resources to pull it off, but if they can point to UTOPIA as their partner, then that helps them go make some of these projects reality. So there's not really any downside there. Like, we're not on the hook for financing or performance of networks. We still would bring projects to the table and say, okay, now, let's say they've got a project in mind of $50 million in this, city right here. We would still need to bring this agreement back with a specific scope of project. So really the approval today would be, we like the idea of doing this, and we like the format of partnership, which is largely based off of what we've already done in Idaho Falls. But we would still, again, we're not proceeding with any project with this approval. It would be a future approval when we have specific scopes identified, and then those become contracts that come to us for future approval. So we like the idea of doing this. They've been a great group to work with. We are already doing some projects that we charge them for as a kind of a consulting entity. So Utopia bills them, I think, I can't remember the exact amount. They got about $20 million of grants, and they're having Tilson Engineering do most of the high level and low level engineering work for those, but we're the ones kind of feeding them. This is the design standards and kind of accepting and denying or tweaking some of the designs, and we charge them for that time, and there's a percentage we build into that program. So we're already making, getting some revenue from them as a result of the partnership. But the significant partnership would be in the actual proceeding with some of these fiber projects, which could be very large. The goal it would be to do something like 500 to million to $1 billion worth of fiber builds over there. That's not our money; that would be them financing and building networks. But they would contract with us in how those get designed, and as customers come onto those, we have a revenue share opportunity. So that's the concept of it. They are very well situated in the sense that there's a $42 billion BEAD program coming down from the federal government, and much of their area is eligible for that funding. Unfortunately, most of our area is not eligible because we have providers that serve our cities, and even the potential partnership cities that we've talked to are not eligible, but those county areas, they have a lot that is eligible. So their potential for funding is very strong. So we actually did a modeling a while back of like what this could look like and what revenues would look like. I wasn't planning to present that today, but just conceptually, we could end up needing some employees to support that, depending on the size and timing of the ramp up. Obviously, we would come to the table with each specific project and say, this is what the impact looks like. But even if they did get into $500 million of project, we would only be looking at 5 to 10 maybe employees to support that effort, and we would have several times the revenue to cover those employees. And it would be a very profitable situation for us.
Hey, Roger, I've got a question. It sounds like you're wrapping up.
Yep, go ahead, Doug.
So where do you have a map of where these counties are located? I mean, are they Southern California, Central California, Northern California, all of the above? I assume they're probably more on the east side of the state versus the west side of the state.
They're more on the east side of the state generally, so they're not as many of the coastal ones, but there are some of them. I guess it's more of the populated counties. So let me do a quick screen share here. I'll see, I have to allow that permission here. All right, you see this map here. So these are the rural counties that make up Golden State Connect Authority. This is RC counties that's almost identical membership. And there's one down in the south, but for the most part, it's kind of mid to north and avoiding the Bay Area and more populous counties. Now, again, there's still some decent sized cities in these counties and 5 million population approximately. I guess 5.5 million is what they've got listed here. So it's a pretty significant area, but even, this territorially is larger geography than Utah, just within these counties. So it's a big area, a lot of potential, but that's what we're looking at. Now, some counties are probably not going to proceed with projects, but some counties are very engaged in seeking to back, debt issuances. They're applying for various grants. It's not likely we end up building an entire county, but it's kind of structuring scopes of projects that are feasible, matched with grant money, matched with any funds they can backstop or subsidize with. That's all on them to figure out of what those would be and how they get funded. It's just when they then pull the trigger on a project, they would say, hey, now can Utopia help us draft the RFPs? Can you help us score these? Can you help with some of the construction management, just kind of oversight of these projects? And then as they get built, those customers would come on and we would manage the, the technology, the monitoring of the systems, and again, it would function largely like it has in Idaho Falls for us, and is also kind of ramping up in Bozeman, which has been a pretty low lift for us. I mean, there have been problems here and there, but it's not like we're staffing up a large number of people to support these. It plugs in nicely with the current team and our current capability. Now, we can't do that forever. As those networks get really big, we may need to hire people here and there just to increase, manage the increased calls and trouble tickets and things like that. But it does scale very well for us.
So I have in section 3.2 of the agreement, it talks about system capacity. And it says that Utopia has determined that it has excess capacity in the Utopia network and that it will make such capacity available. That seems like a real broad statement for something that we don't know how big it's going to be and what they're going to require. What are we talking about in that paragraph?
So that's kind of a lawyer approach to the issue of should we even be in this space and can we? And some of the state code says, I don't know the exact language offhand, but it's a reference to basically say we can be offering services outside of our territory, and the trigger words are when we have surplus capacity, and that basically isn't necessarily like network as in fiber in the ground, but it's meant to be we have surplus capacity and we have a NOC that could be monitoring 100,000 subscribers, whereas today we only have 50,000, right? We have engineering resources and construction management, and while at some point we may need to hire and grow into the need in California and other areas, currently we have the ability to take on quite a bit more than we currently have as far as a supporting network. So we have surplus capacity to take on more project. That's really just a reference to our eligibility legally to provide that service outside of our member cities.
That's not atypical. That's not atypical to other interlocals or districts, such as water districts. They'll do that where they provide the county, like Washington County Conservancy District, serves outside of those boundaries when they quote when they have the capacity to actually do it. So it doesn't mean they've overbought all the water rights. In some cases, it might mean they just got to have a draft contract to take water out of Lake Powell, for all I know. But it helps them. It does it. UAMPS is kind of the same way. It expands as it goes. And I think there has been smattered among the long treatises of statutes we have in those areas that just try to make people feel comfortable that these districts aren't exceeding what's beneficial to anybody else. In this case, it would be beneficial to Utopia, of which almost every member is in Utah. So again, I think it's a generalized term that I didn't come up with. It's been in our other contracts.
So one of my concerns is, and I don't know if anybody else shares this concern, is that we're starting to grow Utopia way beyond, I think, well, I won't say way beyond. Maybe some people's vision is that we were going to become a Western United States or a national company. That was never Murray's vision. We were more focused on Utah, and now we start expanding out into all these other states surrounding us. And I don't know that bigger is always better. So my concern is that getting into this relationship now with California, and who knows where it's going to end with other cities. Is there anything in this agreement referring to termination that allows us to just say, we don't want to do this anymore. I'm okay with the consulting part and kind of what Roger talked about. But if we start getting into operating all these networks in other states, I'm concerned about, what happens to the original cities that originally signed up. What's going to be our, how are we going to play into this? We become a small potato in the pot, if you will. And so I'm just wondering what kind of, if we just decide, or is this committing us to keep going when we say, yeah, we're gonna help you out, we're gonna give you all this capacity, and we're just gonna continue to grow. Is there gonna be something that allows us as cities to trigger this, or does this just get us into the door and we just continue to go with them, and this is our last chance to pull out? Or do we just, I don't know, those are my concerns.
So I'll make a comment before Roger speaks up, and I am going to ask Roger to ask or answer the bottom line question that Doug had asked, which is how are we treated in the contract such that we, what are our outs? How do we end that relationship if it doesn't pan out to be a good one, that sort of thing. But to the larger philosophical question, Doug asked a very good question, and certainly I would agree with him, having been associated with this from basically the beginning, that no, Utopia nor UIA were contemplated at the very beginning to be doing anything other than build a network system for our member cities here in Utah. And as the agencies have evolved, and as the capabilities, as the opportunities have evolved, I have to say that I certainly do support. And, whether we started out, and I can't remember who we started with first, was it Idaho Falls or Bozeman or whoever out of state? Mention the one, Idaho Falls, not to mention the ones within the city. But in my mind, why we would support doing that and how we would support doing that is not based on, whether is bigger better, or is eternal expansion better or not, but more on the net basis, on a bottom line basis. Are we making decisions that are going to contribute to the bottom line? And I think in every one of those instances, that answer has been yes. And especially in Idaho Falls, a Bozeman, and I see this as sort of a similar model, Golden State Connect Authority. We're not actually owning the system. We're not building the system. We're consulting to build the system. And then, yes, we'll have a contract to operate the system. And that puts us in a position of a lot better opportunity to gain revenue on a net basis with a minimum of risk. I think Doug asked a great question on do we become a small potato in our own pond, so to speak? And I don't see that as being a concern, because these cities or these other entities that we contract with, they're not members. We control as a board and as a city, we control what the direction of the city is. As long as we are contracted well, which again is a great question, I don't see that as being a problem. Now, it does make it incumbent on us as a board, no question about that, on both entities, to make sure that we are aware of, we are working closely with Roger and the executive staff to know that we are taking on what we can choose, so to speak, and that we can actually operate within our bounds. So just a little commentary to that. On the contract question, Roger, how does that work as far as separation from this or any other entity?
So we do have a term in there. It's a 10-year initial term, and then there's 5-year options to extend that. So I don't know if there's really a way to get out before the 10 years.
Well, just basic default provision, breaches that are breaches of the agreement between us that are reasonably resolved in a certain amount of time. That anticipates that we stop getting paid, we're still doing the work that we pay. Your basic stuff where they're breaching this substantive portion of the agreement with certain notices, we can't get out. But otherwise, in term, my concern was our terms weren't long enough. Personally, I always thought we should lock ourselves in better with longer terms, but certainly the 10+ extensions are good. And I think Roger's always of the opinion, if they just see what we do, why would they ever want to not have us working for them? Same thing in Utah, so.
Well, but it's, the question is if for some reason we decided we want to have it.
Exactly.
I think the way it's worded is it is a 10-year commitment. I mean, we could fight over things or default somewhere, but I think the intention would be that we'd be locked in and have an obligation for 10 years.
Monetary defaults and non-monetary defaults by either party that are significant with certain notice provisions in it, under 5.5, 5.4 in the draft of the document.
Now, I don't know what the downsides are. I mean, it's like we get into a relationship and it's like, well, where do we get in trouble? I mean, we get paid for services we deliver. It just seemed like it was just distraction to the organization or something. I'm trying to think of scenarios that we might think that the partnership would be bad for us. But the way it's likely to happen is, I'll just bring up an example of one of the potential projects being evaluated. And there's a area by Salinas City, and they call it the Salinas Valley, and there's like 4 cities in that valley, and there's a middle mile fiber already in place. There's a lot of the stuff they need, and those areas are dense enough that the economics of issuing debt, building networks, and paying off that debt work very well. But they just don't have anybody who knows how to do this stuff. And so they would say, great, you know, we've secured the money for this thing now. Utopia, can you give us, you know, some RFP examples of how we would do this? They, oh, sorry, I had someone in the meeting here. And so we would basically help draft some documents for them, help score contractors, all the actual people. Like, we would have no employees in California ever in this agreement. You know, they would have either their own Gold State Connect Authority employees, or they would have contractors, which is the more likely situation locally that they'd hire. And then we would basically say, build everything to our spec and make sure everything works correctly. And then as those customers get installed, we would plug them into our systems for how they get provisioned, monitored. We deal with the service providers, getting them on board and configuring networks between them, and just do kind of a lot of the day-to-day technical operations, and then have all of the boots on the ground is in their side of the agreement with the contractors or internal resources. So again, it would work a lot like Idaho Falls in the sense that we don't have any employees in Idaho Falls. We're able to absorb the work we do for them very easily with our existing teams. It does create some additional work. So as we ramp and scale and get bigger with those partnerships, we do have to incrementally grow, but it's a very good, you know, revenue to expense ratio on the roles that we retain under these partnerships. Yet they are able to launch and move forward with these projects, knowing that they have resources that can make it happen for them, people who know what they're doing. And so they don't have to build a NOC. They don't have to hire up and train network engineers and construction management teams and inspectors. And like we can get all, you know, use our existing resources to support them in getting these networks up and running and operating them over time. So that's kind of how it worked. And I expect, you know, that size of project would be like a $20 to $30 million project in Salinas. And I'd expect each county maybe to have, some counties are 1,000 homes. So some counties are very, very small, and some counties have tens of thousands of homes, maybe even hundreds of thousands, and a couple of the bigger ones. And each one of those are contemplating projects, and I would expect just a handful of those to kind of move forward. But I mean, from my perspective, I'd like a 20-year agreement with those. I'm like, I don't see any downside to us, but I understand politically, or just, you know, from a board perspective, you might at some point, if there's a reason for you to say, I want out of this, I don't see us really having a good out within the initial 10-year period. This agreement is not actually committing us to any of these. You know, it would be only upon, here's an actual scope project with the blanks filled in that we approve and obligate ourselves to that period of time. And at that point, we have a lot more you would have the actual numbers for the project, expected take rates and revenues and all of that to really see, what kind of a burden that is to the organization, and also what the revenue would look like. And at that point, you have better basis of wanting to enter into that agreement or not. But this is a tool mostly to give to them to go run with, that they can then scope and secure funding for.
So we're back to termination then. Again, I'm not an attorney, so I have a hard time understanding exactly what it takes to terminate, but based on what you're saying is that if we want to terminate anytime within that 5-year period, we can terminate or we cannot terminate. It can only be through, in other words, if we terminated, there would be some breach of the agreement within that 5-year period. Is that, trying to figure that out?
Well, it's a 10-year period. The initial term is 10 years. But you're correct. Within that 10-year period, there's got to be some type of justification for doing it. Nothing prevents us from just negotiating out. So if we're into a 5 years, for example, and Utopia and GSEA say together saying, well, we think we've trained enough people to see what you do. Would you mind, leaving 5 years short? We can always do that if we want. Both parties can agree to that. But let's say they don't. Let's say Utopia is valid, and I can't even imagine the circumstances, but it's just not politically viable, or somehow we're not making money, which so far it doesn't seem. It seems like there's a lot of very few downsides on this, and but otherwise we've got to breach something that they want to get out of, and likewise with them, somebody has to really want the other one out to even impose the breach provisions. But again, I guess from our side, we have to know whether or not we're committed to it 10 years. My concern with any agreement with this kind of capital involved would be, the breadth of some of these important projects are that those that we contract with, we have, and so both sides can have an easy out if we want to. On 90 days notice, either party may terminate this agreement. I guess there's a possibility of negotiating that in, but as the months go on, I think for us, I'm assuming it's going to become more profitable because we're going to learn it faster and faster. I guess there's a possibility we can negotiate something in for a termination just upon notice. This just seems like the problem is that we don't want to get out of this agreement in 2 years. They just want to get out because they think they can do it as well as Utopia could. They just give us 90 days notice, and we've just spent a lot of time training them so that they could do it for 8 years. So that's what you look at anytime in these agreements. We could do that. I don't know why we would ever want to do that.
The question being, what's the current structure? The current structure is a 10-year commitment.
Yeah, right now it's 10 years.
Not a commitment being made today. There's really just approving of the structure. But the commitment could start for 10 years when a specific project comes for future approval. At that time, we could probably negotiate changes to it, but the current format would be a 10-year commitment.
I agree with Doug. I think not having an exit clause that allows us to exit for whatever reason, and maybe this may be a great financial profitable venture, but locking ourselves into a 10-year commitment with no ability as the provider to get out unless we breach something, that's an awful long time in the technological world to go 10 years. To me, that seems like a very long commitment with no ability for us to leave.
In this sort of agreement that I've seen in other places, it's unfair to say, hey, we're just going to walk out the door and leave the entity without an entity to pick things up. There's a ramp up and a hiring and a training and other things to transition from a system to another. Would you guys be open to the idea of an exit clause that provided like a 1 year notice? Like we would be.
I would feel a lot better about that.
They will want the same but we have to realize just from a business standpoint, which I'm no businessman. But my guess is, because I certainly would require it, they will want the same from us. So it could be 6 months into the project, they give us a 12-month notice, which I think the longer we go on the project, the more profitable it becomes. But just be aware, if we do that, it'll have to be both ways. At least assume it will anyway.
So with that, I mean, to get through this agenda item, I think it would probably want more discussion or any other questions, but if you were to make a motion to say we accept this format, but adding in language to allow for a 1-year notification to terminate early or something to that. I'm not aware to say what the specific language would be or the motion, but is that conceptually, does that address your concern, Doug and Adam? If we were to approve it with that exception or that term?
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable with that too. They want us, right, at this point. I know we want them too, but they're more seeking out us. So it seems to be like we're more in a driver's seat than they are. My other concern, and those of you that are public power cities may understand what I'm talking about, but our legislature can change the playing table pretty quick when they want, when they don't feel like Utah is being best served by a public entity. And we're facing that right now in public power, where they don't like California controlling our resources here in Utah. I'm not saying that Utopia would be under threat of our legislature, but I just think 10 years, I agree with what Adam just said, 10 years is a long time to be committed in an agreement with another state without any kind of an exit clause. And, 1 year seems reasonable to me. I'd even go longer if we felt like even a couple of years, but 10 years is just a long time.
Okay, looks like a hand raised by Matt Dahl. You have a question?
Yeah. So first of all, I think in the broader discussion of should we be expanding and all that kind of stuff, I mean, I'm definitely supportive of that as an idea, as long as we're clearly getting a net benefit out of that, both in more revenue to create a more stable organization, but also at the same time, I do think that, one of the things, and as we talk about the budget, that I'm interested in is continuing the, I don't know how to phrase this exactly right, but where we are taking efforts to reduce the amount from the debt pledges that the original communities had. So if we're making more money off these things and have an ability to reduce sort of those original cities that have those debt obligations that they're paying for Utopia, then I think this is a good thing to go down that road. Now, I do have a couple of specific questions about the agreement, just real quick, which is when I look at the agenda, it says that you want us to approve and authorize you to finalize and execute this agreement and to give you the ability to negotiate and execute the addenda and amendments to the contract. So earlier, I thought you were saying you would be coming back to us with when they have the service areas and things like that. But this seems to me to say that we're giving you the unilateral authority to do that. Am I reading that wrong?
We probably worded that wrong. I think negotiate would be accurate. Like, I would work with them to figure out what the terms should be and all of that, but to execute, I think my expectation would be to bring that back to the board and say, here's the project we've negotiated, but want to make sure, you would have say on whether we proceed with that project or not.
Yeah, good question, Matt. Certainly, as Roger just termed it, that would be my expectation as well. And I believe in the past, just frankly, from our procurement policy and past experience, we would be doing that anyway. So if we need some different wording, or if that's not exactly clear, I'd certainly be comfortable with that.
Okay. And then
We could probably just take out all the language about Roger being authorized to sign anything. I mean, we can take that from there on out.
No, that's not that's not necessary either. You don't want to, we definitely are not looking to grant Roger broad sweeping authority, but we're also not looking to just by broad sweeping action take it away either. This is a very narrow question we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, only for this contract. I mean, only for the agenda item itself on this contract.
Sorry, what was that? I couldn't hear.
I meant only towards this particular agenda, language.
Yeah.
It's causing trouble.
I don't know how the rest of it, maybe some of the rest of the board members could help me out there in what it is I'm trying to express there. But you do that in one contract and just take all that out, then pretty much you've set the precedent and you're going to be looking at doing that in other areas as well. And that's not something I want to see happen.
Well, so right now it would just be, we would take what's written there, right, and then say with the part and further to negotiate addenda and amendments to the contract. And then we would add the reference in there to the, at this point anyways, the 1-year exit clause. And that's how we would approve the motion, which does get to my other question. Is there a reason that we're doing this as just a motion without a resolution attached to it?
Good question.
Some things require resolutions and some don't. And so I think the understanding is that I, you know, in our bylaws or whatever, I'm authorized to execute these agreements, but we don't, obviously that would be a career limiting thing if I did that without your permission. So it's kind of like bringing it to you for approval on a voluntary basis because it makes sense to. But we don't need a resolution from a legal perspective because that's something required specifically of some actions, but not of this one. This isn't a bonding, this isn't a change of certain things that require resolutions. So this can be approved just by a vote without a resolution tied to it.
Okay.
It doesn't even specifically need that. This is kind of us as staff saying we would like to have the board do this.
Okay, so
Wait, I'm sorry. I do want to go. I haven't looked at the bylaws for a little bit. So you can enter into a contract like this without our approval. Is that?
no.
Yeah, it was. So
I mean, that's why we have this contract before us, Matt.
Sorry, I thought that's what Roger
decision.
said.
And I know Roger just said, yeah, so we'll go continue on, Roger.
My understanding would be that I could, but it would be a bad idea for me to do that, right? Like the bylaws authorize me to enter into agreements. Now there's certain things that need board approval, but there's a lot of things that as executive director, I have the authority to obligate the organization to, in that this would be one of those. We're not financing that, but I'm not going to step out of line, right? I feel like I have a pretty good understanding that I shouldn't do this sort of agreement without board approval, even though from a bylaws perspective, I'm probably authorized to. So
Okay, yeah, so pardon me now, but Roger, I appreciate that. And you're actually kind of getting to the point that I was talking about on this particular contract, but unfortunately, I think we're also sort of confusing the issue more. So maybe you could give us some examples of agreements you would feel appropriate to authorize without bringing it to the board.
Yeah, so we do very large agreements with UETN for building and connecting schools and the various services that we do, roles outside of the norm, projects outside of our member cities, agreements with the state of Utah, for example, for providing services.
Subsection L. The top action plan, subsection L.
And there are a lot of agreements that I sign that obligate the organization on a day-to-day basis that don't come to the size or scope that I feel like would be appropriate to bring to the board. And then I feel like, hey, this is one that the board probably would not want me to proceed with because stepping into California is a thing that I'm sure you all have opinions on. And so I do my best to decide, hey, this is one that you guys don't care about. It's just the day-to-day conducting of business, and this is one that is a political partnership. So that's, again, I don't think you would want to have oversight of every property access agreement that I have to sign, or, you know, that, or every bid that we do, or every proposal that we write. There's quite a bit that I do without board voting. And I think there's, again, there's probably more authorization there for me to enter into agreements than you'd want me to do. And that's when I kind of voluntarily flag those and say, we're going to bring those to the board anyway, just because I don't want to upset you guys and I don't want to step out of line. And so we do bring those to you. And there's been verbal conversation around that. Like whenever we do a city partnership, those should come to the board. It doesn't say that in the bylaws, but that's the way we do it, because that's the way we've been instructed. And obviously we're not going to, I'm not going to step out of line there, because I don't want to.
Okay, I think Roger's illustrating that pretty well, at least from the standpoint of, as I think back across experience of the organization. Does that help with your question, Matt?
It answers my question, and I don't have an example of anywhere where we've ever had any concerns, and we're a little beyond sort of the scope of this, the contract in this, but I guess it does make me nervous that you could bind us in this without coming back to us. If you decide to do something else in your career or something like that, and we have someone less who we don't trust as much as you, that is kind of a thing that is a little scary, that we could get into something like this. But that aside, that's another issue for now, but that explains why we're not doing it by resolution or whatever. I do have just a couple more contractual questions, if you guys are able to, if I can.
Absolutely.
I did not get an opportunity. I've read through the agreement, but I did not get an opportunity to look through any of our other similar type agreements. So I guess the broader question is one of what's the difference between this one? Is there any other differences that you haven't mentioned between this one and some of those other similar arrangements that we have in Idaho and whatnot? And then the other one is just similarly the 3%, 50% overhead or for construction costs, and then 50% for the service fee, or that where we collect that. Is that determined by negotiation? Is that sort of become a standard? Is that set by some sort of industry standard? Can we speak broadly about how we got to those numbers?
Yeah, good question. Roger, why don't you go with that too? I know, and I, by the way, just as an editorial comment, I have had long conversation with Roger about that in each of these individual cities. I can preface by saying there are going to be some differences from city to city and system to system. Yes, Matt, so good question there. It does turn out that in most of these cases with the outside cities, we usually end up on a better percentage, frankly, than we might have expected to say in the past within our own. And I know the situation's a little different in terms of how we charge and what we receive from our early cities. Let me put it that way. Both member cities and maybe the first couple of contracts, but let me let Roger comment from there.
Yeah, so the way we came about the numbers, originally, the first one of these we did was Idaho Falls, and we basically drew out a list of, these are all the roles that need to be done for fiber to the home project, all the different teams and people. And we said, okay, which ones do you want? And then which ones do we keep? And so we kind of carved it out and said, this is in your bucket, this is your bucket. And at the end of the day, it wasn't quite 50-50 in Idaho Falls. We actually tied it to dollars and cents for each of the roles. And so our split there was not quite 50-50. In fact, in the last invoicings, I think we came out at like 52%, something like that. With Bozeman, we did the same exercise and it came in really close to 50-50, even though we were picking specific roles. And so with the Bozeman agreement, that was the first one where we just said, rather than pick each one of these little roles and functions and the dollars associated with those, let's just call it 50-50. So that made it much simpler. We didn't really need to track things as granularly with the spend. In fact, in reality, those are probably going to adjust over time. I want to keep them at 50-50 for now. But as we get further in the projects and we see these projects get to scale, it would probably make sense for us to take a smaller percentage because we're less boots on the ground and scale really well. And they don't scale well on their side. They're hiring technicians and contractors and a lot of resources. I don't mean to change the mix to lose money, just we may not have the same per customer revenue. Like if we ramp those, we would ramp it so that our growth is maybe slightly slower versus just keeping it 50-50 at the end of the day. Because if you look at this project at 50-50 split, 10 years from now and with 50,000 customers, it would be far too favorable for us. That's a good problem to have. We want to keep it favorable. But I would expect those ratios to be negotiated and changed over time. But we'd like to start out of the gate at 50-50. And that's how we got to those numbers. It's really just this is in your bucket, this is in our bucket. The roles that we describe are what make up those dollars and then what ended up being a revenue share model. The 3% was a number. So that's on the upfront as we build and do kind of a purchasing agent role. That's been something we've seen other entities use. I think the state of Utah purchasing department does something similar where they kind of are in the RFP process and award process and charge a percentage on the contracts awarded or their thing. So it's that's a template that we've used for that. That's not an ongoing source of revenue for us. It's just on the upfront. And you say that seems like a really small percentage, but the amount of work we're doing applied to large capital expenses, it's a fair price. I mean, it's in some ways it seems like we get more money than we probably should on that. As they buy $5 million worth of fiber and we facilitate the purchase of that, that's a lot of money for not a lot of work. So that's kind of the role we're filling there. And as we issue work to construction firms and engineering, we're not doing the day-to-day on those. It's more feeding the inputs and doing RFPs and scoring and charging a 3% on some pretty high dollar things. So that's been a good source of revenue for us too, but it's not a recurring one. The one that we're truly interested in is the recurring operating revenue that can become very large over time. Again, the reason we're doing all of this, back to your point, Matt, it's the revenue growth potential. It's, as we're able to grow, it's kind of two things: is we can increase any dividend or offset to the original cities. That's a good thing. And if we can lower the cost of services by spreading it across more systems, that's also good. We haven't raised our rates for services for a very long time, despite inflation increasing costs. And that's because we've had growth with customers. And so our price has effectively gone down. At the same time, our financial positions improve, and continuing to grow in these types of partnerships just gives us more capacity to do that. But that's our motivation. We don't have an altruistic idea. We just want to provide broadband everywhere to everyone because that's the right thing to do. I mean, we want to be good partners to these agencies. So it's not that we're trying to harm them, but there's definitely a mutual benefit there. And our side of that mutual benefit is a revenue and a profit that could be used to help decrease our costs and increase those dividends to cities.
Okay, if I may, Roger, I'm going to interrupt right there as well. Frankly, I'd love to prolong this conversation, but we're running out of time here for our hour, and I know people are having to leave. Sean Warnke, for example, has already had to leave. Matt, I really appreciated your comments there, as well as Doug. I don't think there's anything fatal or killing this project by adding that year negotiated exit. So it sounds like the board would generally be okay with that. Did you have I'm sorry, I may have missed, Matt, did you have any other questions on the contract portion itself?
No, it's all right. I'm good.
Okay. And anybody, I also want to
Robin.
give anybody else an opportunity too. So is there anybody else out there?
Yes, this is Robin from Centerville, and I don't want to prolong this and get off subject, but I would just like to put out there with Matt, if we have things in our bylaws that we are just saying Roger can do, but Roger's saying, well, I wouldn't do that, so you don't need to worry about it. I mean, there is always a concern that, Roger could be gone tomorrow, that I would like to maybe relook at some of these and make sure that we don't have things in our bylaws that we would allow someone else to do that we maybe don't have the trust in that we have in for Roger. So I think that's one thing this has brought to our attention is maybe we do need to relook at that.
Thank you, Robin, for that comment. I would suggest that outside of this meeting, if we have some people that are interested in putting together possibly a little working group or committee or something to examine that, I don't think any of us have any problem or issue with that. That would be fine. But we could talk about that later or in between meetings or however everybody would like to address that. Okay, any other questions on the item? I almost skipped to 4 there and said resolution. I better not do that.
So Chairman, so just so I understand, when whoever makes the motion, that it would be the exception that approved only if GSCA approves a 1-year no fault cancellation and termination of the agreement. Make sure that the board, if whoever makes a motion, agrees that GCSCA only agrees to it if they have the same, so an equal right to back out, whether or not they approve that. I still suspect you're going to ask for that immediately if we want this.
Yeah, it would be a mutual
Yeah,
ability, to terminate with a 1-year notice from either party.
yeah, for no cause.
So what happens if they don't agree? What are you saying?
And we don't have
Well, to
to-
bring it back to you, or just tell them no, I guess.
Yeah, no, we go back and say, hey, we've approved your agreement subject to you counter approving this language we've inserted into ours, which is to have a mutual 1-year termination from written notice.
Okay. And if they did, and if they say no, then you'll bring it back to us as a board.
Or we let it die.
Yeah, we will have no choice because that's why it was brought to the board, irrespective of whether Roger signed on it. And 2 others have to verify his signature that it was done appropriately and with financial oversight. When we bring it to the board, now he can't sign it just because he has a provision in his signed contract, because you guys have said no if it doesn't have that provision. So we'll bring it back. But we don't have it in our meeting until what, June? Yeah.
So if they accept our changes and counter approve with our changes, then I think we consider we have an executed agreement. Today, we would say we've executed a different version from what they've approved, and they would need to counter approve, the amendment in order for that to be in effect.
Right.
Again, we still don't even have a specific scope identified, so it's just approving the format of a partnership, but the specific addendum that would identify scope and specifics of the project with the exhibits still would be approved at some future date.
Okay, well, I'll be happy to make a motion if discussion is finished on this. So I'll move that we authorize the executive director to finalize and execute the fiber communication service contract between Golden State Connect Authority and Utah Telecommunication Open Infrastructure Agency, and further to negotiate and execute addenda and amendments to the contract with the change that we've been talking about, which is to include a 1-year termination agreement for no cause, no fault.
Do we have a second? Thank you, Doug.
I'll second that.
All right, Adam, Cowie will be our second. Krista, if you'll go through.
Well, sorry,
Sorry, Matt, you put yourself on mute. What was that?
did it in the reverse. We had talked about making the change so that it would be that they have the ability to negotiate, but not just to execute addenda and amendments without coming back to us. Were we going to remove that execute portion out of there?
I'm fine with that. Do you want to make that as part of your motion, Doug?
Yeah, I'll accept that.
Okay. And Adam, you okay with that from
I'll
the
still
second
second.
standpoint?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, Krista?
Jeff Munson,
Aye.
Adam Kelly,
Aye.
Matt Dahl,
Yes.
And he's Sean Warren, he left. Derek Euler,
Yes.
Doug Hill,
Yes.
Robin Meekum,
Yes.
Jason Sant,
Yes.
Bob Barnhill,
Yes.
I'm still there.
Wayne Pyle.
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay, very good. Thank you all for that conversation. Those were all great comments and appreciate the effort. Let's move on to item number 4. Now, I will say I'm already late for my next meeting, but if we can, I don't want to rush the discussion either, but I also know we're kind of up against a deadline for adoption of a tentative budget. I don't believe we have another meeting before the state deadline hits. Is that correct, Roger?
Correct.
All right, so let's go ahead and turn the time over for Jason. But Jason, if you can, and again, sorry to be expediting or pressuring you here. I know finance directors don't really like this too much, but if you can expedite this conversation in a way that we can all be comfortable here, that'd be greatly appreciated. I would say at the outset, I've got something like 15 minutes left.
Okay, I will go just as quickly as I can. And can you guys see my screen right now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, very good. Just get my, then with that, I'll dive right into the Utopia budget, tentative budget for fiscal year 2024. Just historically, the first thing we look at when we're looking at the tentative budget is we look at the fiscal year 2023 budget actuals. The biggest deal to know on where we're projecting to be at year end versus where we are. The biggest thing is we're about 2.5 over on revenue and about 2.5 over on expense for cost, other administrative costs. This overage is related to equipment that we buy and then sell to Idaho Falls and Bozeman. I'm going to be recommending that we do a year-end budget revision to talk about that, just to cover what we bought and then sold to them through our pricing and it's just a pass-through cost exactly what we spent. Other than that, I'll quickly say revenues, I think, are pretty much in line overall to be where we expected, where we have them budgeted. Expenses are expected to be, other than that, under what we budgeted, primarily because we've been slow to fill some positions here at Utopia. And that's given us some savings for the year. Right now, we're probably looking at somewhere around $1 million at year end, and that should be a good thing for year end. With that, I will be bringing forward a proposed amendment for 2023 budget to increase revenue and expense for the equipment sales to Yellowstone Fiber and Idaho Falls. And also we closed on the refinancing of the Utopia bonds, and there was an extra roughly I'm going to say 8.5 million with interest that's accumulated in the account that was available for network build out, which we have been doing. Increasing revenues and build out. So that's another amendment that I'll be proposing to the fiscal year 2023 budget. Next slide's operating revenues, just to show kind of, I have fiscal year 21 and 22 actuals, 23 and 24 budget shown in here. The top line that we see is overall revenue for Utopia, and it is increasing fairly quickly, which is a very, very good thing, what we do like to see. The next line here, but what's causing that is revenue coming from UIA and UIA's growth, which is the blue line before. Everything else is fairly consistent. We see some slight increase over time related to Yellowstone, related to mainly Idaho Falls right now, but that's just starting to ramp up, and we're just starting to see some decent revenue come in from that, which is a good thing. Utopia expenses and debt service. This is a pie chart that just kind of shows quickly how our money is spent right now. You'll see that the biggest chunks right now are the blues. Well, at least it's blue on my screen, is salary and benefits right here. Debt service is about 43%, and then administrative costs and network support are smaller expenses that we have every year. Utopia debt service, that is going up every year by 2%. So the difference between 23 and 24 goes from 15.6 to 15.9 million for a 301,000 increase. very happy to say, because of the revenue growth in Utopia, and mainly the growth that's coming from the UIA contract, we do have enough money in Utopia to pay part of the bond payment for next year. Whereas in the previous years, it's always all been coming from UIA. We do have some money in next year's budget coming out of Utopia to have help offset the bond payment, which is a good thing.
So Jason, can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah,
So in the past, you've given dividends. I'm assuming I couldn't see a place where you were giving dividends this year in the budget. So if you're reducing the debt service, does that reduce then the amount that the city will pay of our debt service this year, or is it just on the back end?
what I'm saying is with that, I would propose that reduces the amount that the city pays on the debt service for the last couple of payments of the year.
With still no dividend, right?
No, the dividend, I'll get into the dividend and exactly what we're doing. I have a slide on that.
Okay, thanks.
There's part coming from Utopia, which would be a reduction of debt, and then a dividend coming from UIA because we don't have enough money in Utopia to do the whole thing. So if that makes sense, we're now getting into that situation. Here's just quickly, the management fee from Utopia is continuing to grow. It's going to go up by 550,000 roughly. What's over what's budgeted for 2023, which is very good growth still. Next slide shows Utopia operating expenses. And as we've shown before, most of our operating expenses end up being personnel in Utopia. That you do see a blip here in administrative costs for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. That blip's it's just the inventory that's being purchased by Utopia and sold to Bozeman Fiber and Idaho Falls. That's what's causing that blip there. And it's kind of operational. Revenue goes up to cover it. It's a net zero. So most of the expense we have in Utopia is still personnel.
So quick question on that. Just in the last 2 fiscal years, it's been a 51% increase in personnel costs from one of the slides that I saw in the staff report. Help me understand, is that, are we growing that substantially in Utah? Is that Idaho? Is that Montana? Where?
We have no employees outside of the state of Utah.
Okay. Well, there was comments made though that because like this California contract, Roger mentioned, hey, we may need to add 5 to 10 employees because of that contract. So if we added employees in-house here in Utopia because of Idaho or Montana, or is that part of that increase? Help me understand that growth.
That I will start and I'll let Roger finish. But that is possible. We have seen an increase need a little bit. We haven't seen that many customers, but I think it really has. But it does put pressure on our NOC and a little bit on our engineering is where I mainly see it. Roger, how would you answer that question?
Sorry, ask me the question again.
Is our employee growth, is that being driven by outside the state of Utah forces or inside the state of Utah forces? Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that what you asked?
So I don't know that we have dedicated employees to those systems, but we go and say, well, a portion of our NOC is impacted by Idaho Falls and Bozeman, and a portion of our customer service, and a portion of these. So the nice thing is the revenue would justify entire positions for those partnerships, but we've been able to kind of absorb that into teams of people and not have dedicated account managers or anything like that. Now we do grow. I mean, we have some employee growth forecasted for this budget, and is some of that because of these partnerships? Yes, but it's far short of what the revenues coming from those systems are. So we still see those partnerships as very profitable.
Is there other than we're being successful and we're growing as an agency, is there a reason that we've increased so dramatically over the last 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I can tell you the main thing in there, Adam. I forgot to bring this up. We had a shift in expense. We brought on a whole new department, which is 16 employees, which is Blue Stakes Locating. I'm not sure
right.
the year we did that, but probably the biggest shift we've had is bringing on Blue Stakes and not paying a third party to do that, which we believe saved us money.
I do remember that happening a couple of years ago. That helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the Blue Stakes is where you see is where you do see some increase on the line. I'm not sure if that's between 21 and 22 or 22 and 23. I don't remember. But I do remember we did that.
Okay, thank you. Just something to keep an eye on. That seems like a pretty steep increase, but that helps, Jason. Thank you.
And my next couple of slides are along the same lines. So we do have an increase of employees in the budget this year. A net increase of 5 employees with, we're removing one from the budget that we didn't do last year in finance and accounting, but we have additional employees as shown here. The next slide, actually, this kind of shows you how where they're located, with 2 in engineering, 1 in technology, 1 in locating, and 1 in NOC. As we grow in Utah, that obviously puts pressure on our locate services and our field services. Both of those we have techs that cover areas, and that puts pressure on those. As far as the cost of the new employees we're looking at next year, here would be the total cost of what we would be looking at for new employees, with a total cost of almost $775,000. So that's what we're looking at. I'll give people a minute to look at that.
Hey, while Jason is giving us a minute to look at that, I did want to speak to the larger and longer issue as well, which Adam and Doug and others that have been around for a while will remember this, but some of the newer members may not. That is, we have been speaking for years to the fact that, you know, as we started Utopia and UIA, we had to start that at a particular level and base of support just to be able to run our functions like the network operating center, customer service, that sort of thing. We recognized that certainly within that initial and early setup, there was room, there was capacity, just like was referred to in that last item. And as we got more customers, we were going to be able to realize a revenue and a net revenue benefit on the economy of scale that those or that initial size granted us. And I don't know how Roger would describe it, or Jason, but in my impression, we're still in sort of the latter stages of that. We're still able to, there was just some comment on the network operations for a moment. We're still able to add and grow some of these other entities, whether they're within Utah or without, and be able to use that smaller level of staff at the net, just using the NOC as an example, but also the other things. But then as time has gone by, the Blue Stakes, good memory, whoever it was that remembered that, I guess it was Jason, is reflective of the fact that, yeah, we have found different ways to run the organizations. The Blue Stakes was one where it simply was cheaper and better for us to do that than to contract it out. But we are going to see, as we go forward and add other cities, that we will start having more positions that we got to add. I think Jason and Roger were both trying to be gentle about it, and that is good. And we want them to be very close watching that, as well as we as board. But we will be seeing those increases as time goes past. So it's not, the reason I wanted to make that comment is it's not unexpected. It's not a surprise. It's not something that we haven't heard before. It is something to keep an eye on and watch carefully. But it also represents, or it reflects, the opportunity that we're having as we are, again, expanding, but we're doing it on a net improvement financially basis. So with that, Jason, back to you.
Okay. That's what I have on employees. The last slide I have here does, oh wait, one more thing. We do have a proposed COLA and merit increase in the budget. We did the following survey, just wrote to the cities that are member cities and asked them what they're doing. We received back 8 responses. The Utopia proposal has a 3.5% COLA and a 3% merit in the budget right now. So that's what's in there. If I remember right, I believe it was about a $670,000 cost, something like that, right in that ballpark. Or actually 692, it looks like I wrote it down. So it was a little bit more. Last slide here. I've got 2 sides of this slide. This is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. The first slide compares what's in the budget for the fiscal year 2024 distribution to what's in the budget for the fiscal year 23 total distribution. The second slide explains how the distribution in the 2024 budget is broken out between Utopia and UIA. The amount that's proposed for fiscal year 2024 is less than fiscal year 2023. There's what we're looking at with fiscal year 2024 being less is normally we have we do debt financing of our growth for future growth. This year, what we're showing on our budget is doing our financing off of the profitability of the organizations. We still think that more likely than not, we will be doing debt financing during the year to help finance additional installations. When and if that happens, we will be coming back with a revision to the budget that very likely would increase the distribution to the cities. There are some issues we're working through right now to look at some of our ratios and see how that's going to work. Our profitability ratios, if they're looking at those, they are very, very good at Utopia and UIA. We have some net income to total debt ratios that aren't really cash flow based that they are looking at, and we're going to get a better idea about those. I think I hear somebody trying to talk. Sorry. No?
That could have been me rustling papers. Sorry, Jason. Which might have also. Yep, never mind. I was going to make a joke. I won't. Let's move on.
The 2,200,000 that's shown there, it would be if you take the 2017 number and subtract out the 2% increase per year between 2017 and 2024, that's the $2,205,000 that we're seeing there. That's how this one's calculated. Technically, we could look at going to cash for more of this, but we think the amount of cash that we're pulling out of operations is probably, it's good at the level we have, and we should conserve some cash is kind of what we're looking at. That being said, and I'm sure somebody may have a better way of stating that in the UIA meeting, they basically what we're looking at is just funding to fund operations. It's something we could have done out of cash, but we think funding the growth in this way is better. Is using this cash to fund growth in case there were not to be a bond. That's how we're planning right now. I guess part of the good news is the Utopia, we're able to fund 1.4 million of this out of Utopia this year, and we've never had profitability at a level with Utopia that we've been able to fund part of the bond payment out of Utopia. The remaining $770,000 would be coming out of a UIA distribution of some sort. So that's all I had.
Okay, questions from the board?
I'll go from there.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the reduction of our payment. I worry that we're looking more to the future than we are of taking care of the ones that started. Everything is, oh, we're doing great. I keep going back to my council and saying, I think they're actually going to make it. They're doing better. And then we come back and say, oh, there's only going to be half as much coming back this year. I have a real problem with that.
Maybe I could speak to that too.
Are we going to?
Hey, Doug.
What triggers the?
Doug, are you talking to us?
Who decides how much gets spent?
I'm muted him.
Hold on. Can you get it? Okay. So what I was going to say is we did have some discussion about this before I did. I did with the staff. We could show that dividend at the same level as last year and actually fund it. Robin, I think it was Robin that asked the question. Yes. We chose to show it this way on a tentative basis for the purpose of illustrating the point that Jason made, that the way we would normally operate our cash flows and the way we would normally get those dividends is better reflected by basically how Jason outlined it. But the dividend is still planned to be done or to total the same. It just would be done later in the year through a budget opening or some other means. If the board would prefer that we show it dividend-wise the same as last year, counting on the fact that we're going to go forward and do that debt financing for installs, for example, as well as have the other cash flows, we could do it that way as well. The reason it's important to make that statement is if you have a concern that we're not showing the dividend here and now, that's fine. But don't take away that our financial situation is worse or somehow that we're not going to have the money to do this. Jason and Roger are simply proposing this and showing it in a different way than it was done before. They're trying to not count on revenues that they're not recognizing or seeing yet.
If things go the way we want them to, we would secure, we debt finance our capital expenses, which would free up cash, and we could do the same dividend we've done in the past, but we budget without anticipated bonds. And so when we get a bond and we secure that, then we revise our budgets. And so it's a timing issue. If we just closed on a bond, we have the $4 million in there. But going into a budget year where we're anticipating a bond that hasn't been approved yet, we've got a budget without that. And so then the capital expenses are being funded from cash, which makes less money available. So this is one way to look at it, knowing that we are pursuing financing so that we can come back and revise this.
Yep.
But
And
that's not going to happen in time for approving the budget.
I will say, I do think it is more likely than not, we do close on a bond from speaking with our bond advisors. That's what they've told me. They think it's more likely than not, we do close this year and we can close. But with my conservative nature showing you what we definitely can do, no doubt about it. And
now, having said,
yes,
and having said that, and Jason's comments are right, and I definitely reflective of possibly a little bit of a different approach because Jason's the new finance director, and we certainly don't want to stifle that. But if the board, for example, to Robin's point, just said, yeah, you know what, guys, we don't care how comfortable you are or not, and I'm exaggerating here, of course, we do care about that, but we want you to commit to that dividend and you budget it and you finance it. The UTOPIA and UIA together as a body are able to do that, and we can do that. So if that would be the preference as well on the tentative budget, then simply let us know that as a group, as a board, and we'll proceed that way as well.
Wayne, it's Derek. From the UIA meeting, Jason kind of described over the next 30 to 45 days, there's going to be a lot more information come to UTOPIA on the potential for the bonding. We are simply adopting a tentative budget today with final adoption of a budget coming later. I suggest the staff continue to look at what that bond funding looks like and come back to us at a later date. I'm very comfortable that adopting the tentative budget as we've seen it here today.
That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's right. This is a tentative budget. The official one is not adopted till June, and we certainly can modify it by then. What we can't do, unfortunately, is wait the 30 to 45 days and not adopt a tentative budget. We do have to do that. Okay, other questions or comments?
I just want to this is Matt, I just wanted to reiterate that maintaining this dividend is very important to myself and to Midvale. And I agree that we can approve the tentative budget and all of that, but making sure that it's clear that that is what the dividend is going to be, that we at least get what we got last year is going to be important. And I guess the other thing is just sort of stating that, again, earlier as we're looking at that contract, I was supporting this idea of us doing those things where the financial net benefit to us is significant. And I just want to make sure that it's just stating that as those benefits come in, I want to see that dividend continue to grow in some amount rather than sort of stall out at last year's amount or something like that. But for this document, for the tentative budget, I can support it in the form that it's in.
Good comment.
If I could just weigh in, this is Jeff from Orem. I would just say amen to what was just said. I agree completely with that, but I have no problem supporting the tentative budget.
Thank you, Jeff, as well. Okay, very good. Any other comments? If not, could we have a motion?
Can I just
Wayne, I'll make the
another
motion.
comment, Wayne?
Sorry, who?
Sorry, Doug.
Okay,
Just
Doug,
one
yes.
other, this is just more of a comment. And we talked about this last year. This is a great executive, in my view, and a great executive summary of the budget, which I'm fine with adopting as a tentative budget. And even if we have to adopt as a final budget for this year. But to me, there are a lot of pieces missing to this budget. Staffing documents, well, I don't have to go through them all. You're all part of cities and you know what we're required to submit as cities. In the future, even if it's next year, Jason, it's not meant to be critical in any way. I would just prefer a little more information when we talk about the budget next year at Utopia. I would like to see more of a traditional city style budget with staffing documents and pay ranges and compensation information about benefits, what benefits employees get, what changes are being made to the benefits, if any. Anyway, I'll just make that as a comment.
All right, very good. Thank you, Doug. And I think somebody else spoke up as well, too.
Yeah, Wayne, I was gonna make a motion to approve the tentative budget for fiscal year 23-24 and
Very-
set the time and place for the public hearing on June 12th of 2023.
All right, very good. We have a motion for adoption of the tentative budget and setting the June 12th public hearing. No, sorry, I'm on to the next one. For the public hearing regarding the budget, setting time and place. All associated with resolution 23-01. I may have confused the subject there, but thank you. Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, very good. Krista?
Jeff Lamson,
Aye.
Adam Kelly,
Aye.
Matt Dahl,
Yes.
Eric Euler,
Yes.
Doug Hill,
Yes.
Robin Meekum,
Yes.
Jason Sant,
Yes.
Bob Warrenhill,
Yes.
and Wayne Pyle.
Yes. Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, next item, considering amendments. Jason, how much time do you think this one's going to take? I might have to bow out.
No time, I just need approval. It's just setting a time, right?
Okay, very good.
It's just setting the time for the amended budget next meeting.
No documents or concerns. This is for, as I would understand it, the final, any kind of budget opening that was necessary for the end of the year. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the items I showed on the slide before.
Okay, that's right. Okay, do we have a motion, or can we have a motion and or discussion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we establish June 12th as a time and date for a public hearing to consider amendments to the FY23 Utopia budget.
Second.
Very good. And we have a second from Derek, I believe it was.
Yep.
Okay, all righty. Krista?
Jeff Lamson,
Yes.
Adam Kelly,
Aye.
Matt Dahl. Matt Dahl,
Yes. Sorry.
Derek Euler,
Yes.
Doug Hill,
Yes.
Robin Meekum,
Yes.
Jason Sant,
Yes.
Bob Warrenhill,
Yes.
and Wayne Pyle.
Yes. Okay. Now, let me ask the board's pleasure here, because I am going to have to bow out. Would you like to hear the financial update and the network update? Or what would be the board's pleasure? Should we wait until next month's meeting?
I would recommend we continue these items to the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Anybody else got a preference?
I need to bow out too.
Okay.
So agree with continuing that, if that's okay.
All right, very good. Let's take a quick, just sort of acclamation vote here. All in favor of moving items 6 and 7 to next month's meeting, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed to that? Okay, very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciated your participation in the meeting. And also, by the way, I hardly ever mention this, but everybody please feel free to, of course, call me as well if there's anything I can do or help with or answer questions as far as my position from the board chair spot here as well during the month. Always glad to talk to you guys. And with that, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, without opposition, then I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Have a great April.
Thanks, everyone.